Okay. So, Jane, congratulations.
Thank you.
This book is absolutely amazing. It's being published tomorrow. So I'm really excited to be the first person and presumably not the last to interview about it. Ottoman-Era Documents from the Cairo Genizah, um, published by Open Book Publishers. So it's an open access title that you can download, or you can pay extra to have it printed on demand. And it's an amazing achievement. So my name is Marina Rustow. I'm the director of the Princeton Genizah Lab and a faculty member at Princeton in Near Eastern Studies and History. And I'm here with Jane Hathaway, the author of this amazing book, who is a professor at Ohio State University. And I'm going to ask you some questions about what it was like to work on this incredibly difficult project. I remember back in 2016 when you came to the Genizah lab and you said, I kind of want to get back to Genizah documents. You were an early adopter of Genizah documents back in the um, late 80s when you were a
Right.
graduate student in Near Eastern Studies at Princeton, and learned how to read them, which is, not easy to do. And then you went on to have a very, very distinguished career as a historian of Ottoman Egypt. And as it happens, they're Ottoman era Genizah documents. So I got really excited and I said, Jane, there are Ottoman era Genizah documents that literally nobody knows how to read. And you're the person to do it. And then you did it.
Well,
So congratulations. And it's just a great gift,
thank
to
you.
all of us.
That's a very
So,
flattering description, but thank you.
I mean, here's the thing is that these documents are really, really hard to crack. And as you point out in your introduction, you have to have a very thorough grounding in the history of Ottoman Egypt and really know what's going on in order to be able to make sense of them. In other words, it's not just a philological job, it really is a job for a historian who has the patience and the Sitzfleisch and the philological capacity to sit and actually try and decipher these things. But it helps if you don't know what you're looking at to have some sense of what the range of possibilities is. So you were the right person for the job. So tell us a little bit about the Geniza and maybe what's distinctive about the Ottoman Geniza.
Right. First of all, thank you very much. And I'll just point out that I did have philological help and other kinds of help, which I have tried to acknowledge fully in the book, both in the preface and in the footnotes. The Geniza, the Cairo Geniza, is the famous collection of documents and papers related to the Jewish community of Egypt over a thousand-year period, from the 10th century through to the late 19th century. These were old and worn out documents for the most part, and the conventional wisdom is that you did not want to destroy any document that contained either the name of God or references to God. So instead, they were deposited in the first instance in a specially built storeroom in the Ben Ezra Synagogue, which is located in Fustat, which today is a far southern neighborhood of Cairo. But we know now that the corpus also includes materials from other synagogues and from Jewish cemeteries in Cairo and vicinity. They aren't there anymore because in the late 19th century, they were removed from Cairo by various scholars and antiquarians and relocated to various collections in Europe and the United States, which is where they are now. Um, as for the Ottoman era material, there are several things that distinguish it from the much more copious and better studied medieval material. By medieval, I mean roughly 10th through 13th centuries Common Era. The first thing is a greater variety of languages. The medieval material, as you well know, is mainly in Judeo-Arabic, that is, Arabic written in Hebrew letters, Arabic in Arabic letters, or Hebrew in Hebrew letters. Um, you have those languages in the later corpus as well, but you also have a number of documents in Ladino, that's Spanish written in Hebrew letters, because of the influx of Jews, not only to Egypt, but to all other Ottoman provinces. and to the imperial capital, um, of Jews who had been expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, in the 1490s. Um, you also have a small but not insignificant number of documents in Ottoman Turkish, and that was a surprise to me. I hope to say more about that in a minute. Um, Among the Judeo-Arabic documents, the Hebrew handwriting in the later period is notoriously difficult to read. It's what my Ohio State colleague Daniel Frank calls a Sephardic cursive. Um, and it's for most people more difficult than the Hebrew script of the medieval period. That's the main reason I've chosen to focus in this book on Arabic script documents, because I think it would take me for the rest of my natural life to become comfortable with the Hebrew hands of that era. Um, the other big distinguishing feature is there is very little reuse of paper in the Ottoman-era documents. As you know better than almost anyone else in the world, a common feature of the medieval documents is that a document that was written, say, in the 11th century might be turned 90 degrees, and the margins used maybe even centuries later to write something completely different. Or the verso, that is the flip side of the document, might be used centuries later for some other purpose. There was also use of palimpsest, that is, the original writing would be erased or somehow scratched out and effaced, and the space would be used for new writing. There was also, and again, you're the expert, purchase of used chancery documents from the Egyptian government. Uh, the blank spaces would simply be used, often with the original writing still present, for documents in Judeo-Arabic or what have you. You don't really see this for the Ottoman period. Um, in most documents, either the verso is blank or it is related to the recto, that is the front side of the document. Marginalia are either a continuation of the text on the recto or somehow related to it. Couple of reasons for this. Paper was much more available in the Ottoman period. It was being produced in the Ottoman Empire as well as imported from outside. And also, there seems to have been a greater selection of what documents went into either the Ben Ezra storeroom or the well-known Jewish cemeteries. And that's because these areas of Cairo were no longer the hub of Jewish life. So a selection would be made. The important papers of a Jewish dignitary who died, for example, would be taken some distance to these places, which implies that there are other buried documents or stored documents that either haven't survived or have not been found, which is always possible.
Yeah, that was actually one of the most interesting things that I learned from your book that I hadn't realized before is that there was sort of a different life cycle or afterlife of the Ottoman era documents that rather than being put directly in the Ben Ezra Genizah chamber, they were taken to the cemetery of El Bassetin and essentially buried, like interred, along with the dead human beings. And it
Or
was only
separately,
when the
so separate portion of the cemetery, probably not with the body, I don't think.
not next to the body.
I don't think
Um,
it's possible, but I don't think so.
and it was only then in the 1890s that the caches got kind of mingled together, it sounds like. Is that correct?
Yes, that's not my finding. It's the researcher Rebecca Jefferson who wrote this incredible book published in 2022, I think, The Cairo Genizah and the Age of Discovery in Egypt.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So, that suggests that we have to kind of envision not only a slightly different life cycle for the documents once they kind of outlived their um, useful lifespan, but also presumably different patterns of deposition. So, like, have you noticed with the Ottoman documents that there is a greater quantity of official documentation? Um, what have
The,
you found in terms of patterns of deposit?
well, I could explain some of the genres, and the short answer would be yes. In fact, for this, I will attempt to share screen. Yeah, so there are quite a few, at least in this corpus, and bear in mind it is Arabic script, so you would expect more government documents given that selection. Um, Court case summaries, like the oldest of the documents in this book from the late Mamluk Sultanate, and the latest one from 1829, when Egypt is already under the rule of the autonomous governor Mehmed Ali or Muhammad Ali Pasha. Court case summaries, letters and petitions to government officials, often the governor of Egypt for the Ottomans. Um, and I think because these documents were official, they were saved, and they often belonged to prominent members of the Jewish community. Um, and so that could be one reason why they were deposited. This is all very speculative at this point. I mean, we don't have hard and fast rules on what got in and what did not. And because of the uncertain provenance of some of these documents, did they really come from the Ben Ezra synagogue? Did they come from the Basatine? We don't really know because of the nature of the collection process in the late 19th century. Um, we have to speculate on why these things ended up in the Geniza. The documents themselves usually don't tell us.
Right. So I'm going to delve into the um, contents of the documents in a moment. Um, but I want to actually just ask a sort of more basic question first,
Mhm.
which is, so you're an Ottoman historian, and one of, people like me who work on the 11th and 12th century are envious of you guys because you have so much documentation preserved in the Ottoman archives, and you just have a real wealth and abundance of sources compared to us. So what drew you to Geniza documents? Why would somebody who could be working in the Ottoman archives actually want to work in the Cairo Genizah? What's different about it? What does it give you?
Well, part of it is my rather peculiar academic background. As you pointed out, I did my PhD in Near Eastern Studies at Princeton, and I originally went there way back in 1986 to work on the Geniza, on the medieval corpus. But by the time I got there, I had completed a master's thesis at the University of Texas on Egypt in the late 18th century. And there was part of me that wanted to continue with Egypt under the Ottoman Empire and to add the Ottoman context, to start studying Turkish, to get a firm grasp of the overall arc of Ottoman history and Ottoman institutions, etc. But there was another part of me that wanted to pursue the Geniza angle. And for my first year at Princeton, I more or less did both. But by the end of that first year, it was pretty clear that the Ottoman era stuff that the Ottoman Empire stuff had won out. But it was in the back of my mind. I knew there was Ottoman era material in the Geniza. At the time, I did not know how much or what it was like, and I thought someday I would like to return to this. Well, it took until the fall of 2020 for that to happen. Um, So this is not, the Geniza is not never going to replace the Ottoman archives or even narrative sources such as chronicles as sources for Ottoman Egypt. But what it can do is provide a supplement, particularly if you're interested in the Jewish community specifically. Rather like Muslim court records, it introduces figures, people that don't show up in the official archival documents. The surprising thing is how many people who do show up in archival documents and chronicles are also present in some of these Ottoman era documents, at least the ones I read or attempted to read. So it gives you maybe a bit more depth of detail. It inserts the Jewish community very much into the overall pattern of Ottoman officialdom and Ottoman era merchants. They're not just tangential to the society. I won't say they're integrated because in a 21st century context, that is a loaded term, but they are a part of the society. particularly the higher echelons, part of commerce, part of government operations, in tandem with Muslim officials, with Christian merchants, etc. So I hope that answers your question more or less.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what that was one of the really amazing things that I learned from your book is the importance of Jewish port officials.
Yep.
That's like a big find. So can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, it's been known for quite some time that Jewish merchants were overrepresented in the administration of customs at the Ottoman ports. This is not just in Egypt, but throughout the empire. Salonika in what's now Greece comes to mind, Izmir in what's now Turkey, Western Turkey, um, even non-maritime ports such as Aleppo in northern Syria. Um, This seems not to have been a pattern in the Mamluk Sultanate, which ruled Egypt before the Ottoman conquest in 1517. Um, and it was part and parcel of the, at least in Egypt, of the Jewish community's enmeshment with military officers and officers in the Janissary regiment in particular. The Janissaries were the Ottomans' elite infantry. Many provinces, very much including Egypt, had a Janissary garrison. They served officially as guards of Cairo's citadel, and to a lesser extent as guards of the citadels, the small citadels in the port cities like Alexandria and Damietta. But they weren't really a professional army in the modern sense, and they had sidelines in commerce. Um, so what the Janissary officers and their households, which are conglomerations that they led of kinship and patron-client ties, sort of like a mafia household, but operating legitimately. Um, their priority was securing a source of income, and that's where the port customs come in, particularly in the Mediterranean ports. And they were very happy to partner with these wealthy Jewish merchants who administered the ports on the spot. It was kind of a win-win. Everyone made money in that scenario, except, of course, the ship captains and the people who were actually shipping their goods through these ports. They were paying the fees. But yeah, that is very much a pattern in the Ottoman period. And the Jewish enmeshment lasts right up until the mid 18th century when one notable in particular, Ali Bey, deliberately edges them out of the port customs directorship and replaces them with Syrian Catholics.
Fascinating. So is that what we're seeing in document 3 here on your screen on the upper right? The
Yes.
1708 letter?
Yeah, this is a letter written by the commander of the very small Janissary garrison unit in Damietta, one of the Mediterranean ports. We don't know whom he was writing to because the top of the document is cut off. Um, he's trying to get help for the Jewish merchant named Musa who directs Damietta's customs, and he's appealing to four military and administrative grandees, three of whom are based in Cairo, for support letters for Musa. Uh, Musa needs help because he has a dispute over fishing nets with someone whom the letter calls only the Christian. So, what was very surprising to me was two of the people he mentions are officers in Cairo's Janissary regiment. And when I was reading the document, I realized that I knew exactly who they were. They were members of the Kazdala household, one of these Janissary households, which was the subject of the first book I ever published nearly 30 years ago. Um, at the time in 1708, the Kazdalas were competing with other Janissary households for control of the regiment. Um, they would cement that control in the 1720s, and by the 1750s, they were essentially running Egypt, which they would really continue to do right up until the French invasion of 1798. And so it's clear that even at this relatively early date, the Khazdalas wanted control of the Mediterranean customs. So this was not the only document in which I recognized people on whom I had previously done research, and it was very surprising because you don't expect to find
Your best
historical
friends.
figures. Yes, exactly, in the Geniza.
Or you expect to find unknown figures as opposed to the figures that you know about from your prior
Exactly.
life. But it's really one of those cases where it's like the perfect match. Like this document has found its modern historian. And so did you learn something about them that you didn't know before?
Um, that they were disinvested in port customs when they were still at this fairly low officer rank. It's Otabasha, which is like literally means head of the room. Divisional commander, I guess, would be the best translation. The other freaky thing about this document is that the head of Damietta's customs at the time, not Musa the Jewish merchant, but the specially appointed sort of customs czar appointed by the Ottoman governor, was someone named Musa Bey. So he was not a Janissary officer, he was a Sanjak Bey, which is a different rank. Um, he was appointed in 1705 in an attempt to take the customs away from the Janissaries, which, on the basis of this letter and other sources, absolutely did not work. Um, and so when he died, that later that same year, the governor just gave up. But he was a convert to Islam from Judaism. Uh, I had published something about him previously, and so I already knew that he was a convert. It's not mentioned in the letter. This is probably a coincidence, but coincidence or not, what appears on the verso of this letter is a Jewish burial prayer called the Siddur Kadin. And when I saw that, I immediately thought it must be for Musa, but then I thought, no, that's probably unlikely. It's probably just a coincidence. But this particular document was one of the most surprising I found.
Surprising on both sides, on the recto and the verso.
Yes, absolutely.
And so people like Musa converting, does that then also explain document two that we're looking at on the screen?
Do you mean this one?
Yes.
It could. This is a very strange document in Ottoman Turkish. It's a primer on Islamic practice, a genre that in Turkish is known as ilmihal, in Arabic ilm al-hal. Um, and we don't know who wrote it or when or for whom it was intended. That's not included. Because of the genre, it we have to say it dates from the 16th century or later. And what it is a kind of how-to book for proper Muslim practice. In this case, prayer, for the most part. More like how not to, because every line is various mistakes you can make that will make your performance of one of the five daily prayers invalid. Um, it is not like other works of Ilmihal. I've shown it to Turkish colleagues and they say, "Oh no, this is not like the works of Ilmihal I've seen. It does not contain references to great Muslim jurists of yesteryear. It's very stripped down and basic. You can see it's written in a very large, clear hand, fully voweled, and so it's kind of almost like see spot run. Your prayer is invalid. That's how every line ends. And works of Ilmihal were used by converts. That wasn't the only audience, but given how large and clear it is, it could have been used by Jewish converts to Islam. Maybe that's why it ended up in the Geniza. Um, this page, it's not consecutive. The folios were meant to be folded together into a little booklet. And my guess is that given the size of the thing, it's about 23 by 46 centimeters. So not all that much larger than a piece of legal paper or A4. Um, it could have been passed from hand to hand. It could have been read aloud to instruct people who did not know how to read, or at least did not read Ottoman Turkish. So it's quite possible it was used by Jewish converts. We don't know. It could have ended up in the Geniza by accident. Would Yusuf Bey have used something like this? Maybe. Again, we have no way of knowing because we know nothing about his pre-conversion background.
Fascinating. And so what we're looking at on the screen here, I mean, you have some documents in Ottoman Turkish and some documents in Arabic. And I know that you worked a little bit on some Judeo-Arabic as well, because you were forced into it, basically because you found it on a document you really wanted to crack, and you thought, I got to get this too. So tell us a little bit about the division of labor among languages and scripts, and how that maps onto genres.
Wow, that's a tough question. Well, the documents I focused on were in Arabic script. There is a much larger quantity in Judeo-Arabic in this Sephardic cursive hand that's so difficult to read. Um, where you find it on Arabic script documents is often in strange addenda or in filing notes, and I can project or attempt to project an image of an extremely difficult document that does have a Judeo-Arabic filing note.
Oh, I remember
So,
this one.
yes, this is the hardest thing I've ever read in my life in any language or script. It's a 1538 court case describing repayment of a debt to the famous Jewish notable Abraham Castro. And here I have to give a shout out to Alan Elbaum, um, someone you hired as a research assistant at the Princeton Genizah project. He identified Castro. He is named in the document, but I was not picking up on the name um, because, I mean, this is basically illegible. It took me a couple of years even to figure out who the main characters were and who the judge was, where it took place. It's from Damietta. Alan was also instrumental, as was Dotan Arad from Bar-Ilan University, who's arguably the world's leading expert on the Ottoman-Era Genizah. Um, Instrumental in reading this Judeo-Arabic filing note, which is sideways up at the top. And I really think that this was part of Abraham Castro's papers, and the only way he had of figuring out what it was about when, if he looked at it years later, was this filing note. This is not uncommon for court documents of this kind. They even left space for it. So, as Alan explained, it would have been written in immediately after the recto, this is the verso of the document, and this half of the verso, then the filing note, and then several weeks later, the final disposition of the property and money that was owed to Abraham Castro. So the Judeo-Arabic just gives you a summary of what it is. It's an ishhad or attestation to the sons of Badr ad-Din. These are the two brothers who owe Abraham Castro a bunch of money. And it's from summer and fall of 1538. So only, wow, 21 years after the Ottoman conquest of Egypt.
And was it a lot of money at stake?
Um, let's see. Oh, you're putting me on the spot. It was several thousand paras, or then the silver piece that was used in Egypt. It was originally a late Mamluk coin. That the value was changed, but it continued to be used under the Ottomans. But the other thing is that they apparently rented a boat from him. And on this side of the page, as if it weren't already hard enough, the boat, they had 18 shares of the full 24 shares of this boat. I mean, they didn't literally carve up the boat, but that was the share that they held. And the boat is described with all its appurtenances, the mast, the sails, oars, etc., in excruciating detail. And this is technical terminology. So
That sounds like a nightmare.
it,
I've
it
been there.
was. Alan helped me to figure out that he saw the word for an anchor. I thought it was silk, harir. It was actually iron, hadid. Um, that it was an iron anchor. And I had figured out that a boat was involved here. It was a boat that sailed in Lake Manzala, which is the lake bordering Damietta. And at one point, I was just Googling oars in Arabic, sail in Arabic, just to try and figure out what these words could be. And I think they would have been recited in the actual court building by people who weren't necessarily literate, like people who were familiar with boats and navigation. So they weren't necessarily taken down accurately as well. And my theory is that you have all kinds of unusual plurals and spellings that the court scribe would not necessarily have known how to correct. So that was the boat was supposed to go back to Abraham Castro's agent and ultimately ends up in the possession of this boatman who suddenly appears on this side of the document, not having been a party to the case before.
That sounds like an incredibly challenging. I mean, I'm looking at it and it's terrifying. An incredibly challenging document, but it's amazing that you cracked it. I mean, it takes so much perseverance to be able to actually wrangle something like this with all of its technical terminology and realia, and it's just great. So this was one of the documents that actually had some Judeo-Arabic on it, but in reality, you kind of really focused on the Arabic script. But they're also, I mean, there are different kinds of Arabic script. Some is more calligraphic, some is less calligraphic. The Ottoman Turkish version of Arabic script, I mean, for me, I'm used to reading Arabic script, but that is much, much more difficult to read. So you sort of had to adjust according to the genre, right?
To some extent, I'll try and get the other. Oh, here we are.
Perfect.
Yeah, this one it does look more like an Ottoman chancery hand, and I speculated that the garrison commander in Damietta, might have been a native Turkish speaker, might have had chancery training, or he hired a scribe who had that training. Um, whereas sometimes Turkish, as written by a bureaucrat who's based in one of the Arab provinces, can look less like this and more like, well, something like this. This is actually Ottoman Turkish, but a fairly legible hand. And this is the Sufi poetry, which I also was not expecting to find in the Geniza.
So yeah, that actually leads me to my next question, which is what is the most surprising thing that you found in this corpus of documents?
Well, I've already mentioned a couple of things. One is the number of people whom I recognized and on whom I had already done research and even published on. Um, I really was not expecting that. The number of Turkish documents came as a surprise, and I think more and more are being identified as Turkish. They're often cataloged as being in Arabic or Persian simply because the catalogers weren't familiar with Ottoman Turkish. And I have to hand it to the Princeton Genizah Project's team for flagging documents that they thought might be in Turkish and alerting me. The um, the primer on Islamic practice was a definite surprise. Even more surprising was this Sufi poetry. Um, Sufism is Muslim mysticism. Um, and these are a total of three poems in a document that bears the date 1758. Well, 11, looking at my cheat sheet here, 1172 of the Islamic calendar. Um, the first two poems are by, or at least attributed to, a known Ottoman poet called Ashik Ömer, who lived in the 17th century and was one of those wandering mystical poets. I did actually try to find these two poems in his thousand-page divan, which has been published by two Turkish scholars, and in the various poems in informal collections that have also been published, but I could not find these two. So I find it hard to believe that they are unknown poems by Ashik Ömer. I guess it's possible that ended up in the Geniza, but they're certainly attributed to him. We know that Ashik Ömer was a mystic of some kind. What order he may have belonged to is a source of some scholarly debate. The third poem is by someone called Yahya Çavuş, and he may have written all of this down. He may have recited the poems to a scribe. Çavuş is a military rank, and he was probably an officer in Cairo's Janissary regiment who maybe dabbled in poetry. The weird thing, though, his poem is definitely mystical, but it's a specific type of Sufi attitude or trend called melami. It's a kind of self-denigrating mystical attitude where you welcome the condemnation and humiliation of others. And so it's written in couplets, and every couplet goes something like, May the people who condemn me always be praised. May I never get what I want, only let them get what they want. And here I have to give a shout out to my former Ohio State colleague, Victoria Rowe Holbrook, who really, who's an expert on this kind of Sufi poetry, and who, along with her colleague Mujahid Kachar, who's a professor at Istanbul University, really helped guide me through this poetry. I had never worked on Ottoman poetry before, and this was quite something to deal with. This is, I think it's a genre known as a junk in Turkish, which is kind of an informal collection of handwritten folk poetry. There is a verso to this document, but it's just the rule borders. So that indicates that whoever wrote this down was expecting to add more poetry.
So, I mean, a couple of things just came out there. One is that it takes a village
It does.
sometimes to to decipher a single document, and of course that's become possible basically just in the last 5 years. That kind of working together across long distances has become the norm, and kind of much more mainstream than it used to be. But second, I mean, I'm still like stuck on this Ashik Umar thing. It's amazing that you may, I mean, best case scenario, you've discovered two poems of his that never made it into his divan, because I assume that people collected somebody's poetry, either during their lifetime or after they died, but they didn't necessarily round up everything, right? So,
Right. I think he produced a divan himself. He sort of bridged the gap, if there is one, between divan poets and folk poets. Victoria Holbrook, I should add, would probably debate whether there is any difference between the two or not. I hope I'm not misrepresenting her views. Um, but he did have madrasa training, so formal theological training. Um, he had connections to the Ottoman court, and he did produce a formal divan, but there are also many poems that he maybe recited that were written down and that ended up in other junks. And there are various articles um, published by Turkish scholars over the years reproducing these poems from these little collections. So it's possible that these are two unknown poems of his, or else it's just poems that are attributed to them. They do, from what I, as a total non-expert, can tell, fit his style. And the usually quatrains with certain rhyme schemes and sophisticated allusions and language, a kind of poetic sophistication that Yahya Chavush, if I can say this, really does not have, and maybe is not trying to have. Um, it occurred to me that it could be someone, either Yahya Chavush or someone else, trying to imitate Ashik Amir's style. And where better to do it than in some provincial junk that, no one at the court is probably ever going to see.
fascinating. So, okay, so variant on that question, the question I just asked you was what was surprising, but now I want to know, what's your favorite document that you found in this whole corpus?
I have to say my favorite is that horrible, I'll try to share it again. This is the 1538 Damietta court case. Are you seeing it?
No.
Anyway, that really is my favorite, as horribly difficult as it
Is it your
is.
favorite because it was so difficult? Sometimes that
I think so.
happens.
I spent a lot of time on it. At one point, I dug out one of my old Ottoman archives research notebooks and just took a pencil and was trying to trace the script, because not only is it not vowel, but even the dots that distinguish, for example, a B from a T were not necessarily there. And ligatures of all kinds. I really will stop the share and try and share the image of this dreadful document. I spent a couple of years really just not constantly, but going back to it and trying to figure out what was going on. I figured out that it was in Damietta. It says Dulgar Dumyat, the port of Damietta, somewhere up here. When I go back to it, it's hard to identify this stuff because you really have to be in the zone. Um, and this is the verso as well, so it doesn't necessarily contain all that introductory material. The judge's seal, or there are two judges involved. Um, the head one, the one who starts the case, is Abdurrahman ibn Hassan al-Aqsarai, which means he's or his forebears are from Aksaray, a city in what is today central Turkey. But he's Hanbali, um, meaning he belongs to a legal right of Sunni Islam that had relatively few followers at the time. It was certainly not the official Ottoman rite, and most people from Anatolia would be Hanafi. And he seems to have switched legal rights so he could specialize in certain cases. This phrase up at the top, which Alan actually deciphered most of it, is what's called his alama, and that's really a Mamluk Sultanate era pious phrase that every judge had. So what this shows, among many other things, is that the kind of late Mamluk Sultanate format of a court document had been retained. This would change in the early 17th century, give or take. You would no longer see an alama of this elaborateness. Instead, you just see a simple Arabic phrase, the matter as it was reported. One thing that has changed, and one way I was able to date the document, the date does occur on it, is that in Ottoman documents, you always look for the date at the end. And it is mentioned, take my word for it, at the end of the verso and also on the recto in the marginal continuation. Whereas in the 14th century, at least, the date would appear near the beginning of the document.
Aha. So you have to really have to hunt. Um, and I see two stamps on the page, one in the middle and then one on the bottom right.
Yeah, this is probably the other judge's seal. It's kind of illegible, and his name was Abu Bakr Muhammad al-Dumyati, so someone from Damietta, and he was Shafi'i, which was the majority legal right in the Nile Delta. So it's not a surprise to see him there, and he seems to be overseeing the final disposition of the boat, and also the fact that the money was supposed to go to Abraham Castro. Another interesting thing about this document, the port customs of Damietta in 1538 were being run by Abraham Castro's son Joseph. This is a son that we didn't know existed before. We know about two of his other sons, one of whom was a very famous halakhic expert, but not this one. And I wonder, why not? Was he illegitimate or what? But it becomes clear on this right side of the verso, Joseph is just collecting the money and dealing with the actual court case. Um, in the right hand column, Abraham Castro's agent, his wakil, comes into the picture, and his job is to make sure that he gets the money and transmits it to Abraham, who is probably in Jerusalem at this point, and that his son does not keep it. That is made abundantly clear. His son is acting only as his proxy.
So that suggests that there's what does that tell us about Joseph, the son, that could be useful for us to know? Like, why didn't we know about this guy?
Well, he might have been illegitimate. I don't think the name Castro is applied to him, although I would have to double check the document or try to make sure. He's usually just called Mu'allim Yusuf. Mu'allim was a generic term. It literally means expert or master. It was often applied to merchants of any confession, but often Jewish and Christian merchants. Um, to put it in context, it was not uncommon for Abraham Castro to install his relatives in port customs directorates. He actually had his brother Benjamin serving as a guarantor, kafil, in Alexandria at one point. So he very much saw his family members, at least apart from the son who was a scholar, as part of his economic and political network. And he was so well connected. I mean, by this time, according to various chronicles and even internal Jewish community evidence, he was more or less running Egypt himself, partly because he had helped foil a rebellion by one of the governors in the 1520s.
Right. This is the Ahmed Pasha
Ahmed
episode.
Pasha, yes. Another thing about
Um,
him is that he's like the office of head of the Jews was abolished after the Ottoman conquest, not as a punishment or anything, but just because I guess you could say it had reached the end of its usefulness already in the late Mamluk period. But Abraham Castro was kind of like a post head of the Jews, head of the Jews. He really was regarded as the head of the community. And the Hebrew title, Nagid, is sometimes applied to him in Hebrew sources.
was Abraham Castro born in Egypt, or was he an Iberian exile?
Um, he was not born in Egypt, but he did not come directly from the Iberian Peninsula. I think his parents or grandparents had that origin. The name Castro, of course, is a Spanish name.
Got it.
Uh,
Fascinating. So he's another one who we knew he existed, and then here he is in a kind of mundane but not so mundane document. Not so mundane given the amount of money involved, but mundane in that this is presumably an event in his life that we didn't know about.
yes, exactly. And part of the reason I was not reading his name correctly, in addition to the nature of the Arabic script in this document, is that I really was not expecting to find someone that prominent in a random document.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Okay,
Right.
so my last question for you is: who is your ideal audience? Who do you think will find this book useful, and what can they do with it?
That's a good question. I think it might have some appeal to two different audiences, a Jewish studies audience and a more hardcore Ottoman history audience. Where Jewish studies is concerned, the documents do give us a kind of snapshot of Egypt's Jewish community and even the broader Ottoman Jewish community or communities at different points during the Ottoman era. Um, so I'm trying to find my cheat sheet here. Um, You mentioned port customs. You can certainly see not only in this document, but in several others, the role that Jewish merchants played in administering the port customs, especially in Alexandria and Damietta, but also the Nile ports at Bulak and Fustat, or Misr al-Qadima, as the port area was called. Um, Another feature that's very clear in the Ottoman period, which I've alluded to, is how enmeshed Jewish merchants were with military and administrative figures, above all, Janissary officers. And this plays out in a number of documents from almost throughout the Ottoman period, ending, as I said earlier, in the mid-18th century. Um, you also see that intercommunal commerce um, involving Jews and Muslims, Jews and Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Christians is really routine. It is shot, these documents are shot through with it, and it does not seem to be anything unusual. Um, the 1708 letter makes this abundantly clear, but it's not the only document in which this reality finds expression. Um, I would say these documents shed additional light on the last heads of the Jews in the late Mamluk period. There are two late Mamluk documents, and one I showed on screen. I guess I should try and share the original slide again. One is this 1375 document. The other one is from 1499, and it describes how the second to last head of the Jews under the late Mamluks gave supervision of all endowed property, all religious endowments in Cairo and Fustat to these two Jewish merchants. Um, and then I was mentioning that Abraham Castro is kind of like a post head of the Jews, head of the Jews. You can see how that position kind of slowly transitions out and gives rise to a new kind of community leadership that really is based on prominent Jewish merchants. I mean, the last heads of the Jews were themselves prominent merchants. They were not rabbinical figures necessarily, or they combined both roles. In the Ottoman period, you go almost entirely to a largely Sephardic prominent Jewish merchant community leadership. Um, at the other side, in the latest documents, like this one from 1829, you can see the transition in community leadership to this new office, the chief rabbi, Hakam Basha in Turkish, which is supposed to be an empire-wide office, but you can see, and this is something we know from secondary scholarship, rather like the head of the Jews under the Fatimids in the 11th century, it took a number of decades for the office really to become consolidated. And in the early years of the 19th century, it starts to be used, but you see it being applied to different people, both in the imperial capital, Istanbul, and in Egypt. Um, so it's kind of institutional development where Jewish studies is concerned. Where Ottoman and Mamluk studies are concerned, I think these Genizah documents can really serve as supplements to archival documents from the Ottoman archives and from the Sharia court archives of the various successor countries, Egypt, Syria, etc., and also supplements to narrative chronicles and similar narrative sources on a number of topics, one of which is economic and political institutions, such as port customs directorates. Another thing that comes up in several documents is Egypt's role in supplying the imperial capital, and more specifically the Ottoman palace, with tribute and with luxury goods like sugar and rice. There's one lengthy court case from 1649 that's all about delivery of sugar. And again, this is one of those documents where I recognize the people in it and the officials who were there to make sure, two officials in particular, who were there to make sure that sugar got to the palace. Um, More generally, the issue of tribute, Mali Miri, the tribute that Egypt delivered annually, and its combination of cash and goods, sugar, rice, livestock, etc., and it was shipped out through the Mediterranean ports. And the customs directors played a huge role in assembling it and sending it off. And so anytime there was a problem, you'd have letters and petitions going out, and some of these ended up in the Geniza. So you really see the Jewish customs directors taking responsibility for delivering this tribute. Um, it comes up in 3 or 4 documents, if not more, from a range of periods. Um,
That's
Legal culture.
amazing.
Oops, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's amazing because anyone who's interested in kind of the role of minorities in the Ottoman Empire, which is a really big historical subject that a lot of people work on, will find this to be interesting.
I hope so. Um, Broader topics like legal culture, about a quarter of these documents are court case summaries. And things like, such as I was just talking about, how the document is formatted on the page, um, the use of witnesses, certain legal strategies like switching from one legal right to another in a Muslim court of law because you know it will give you a better outcome. That can all be documented or can be traced in some of these documents. Epistolary culture. A number of the Ottoman Turkish documents are letters and petitions, and what I would call petition letters. They're actually letters, but they read like petitions to government officials and often to the governor of Egypt. You can't always tell because they just use the generic sultana, my sultan or my overlord, um, asking for help with safety during travel, with getting rid of an administrator who's blocking the shipment of the tribute, this kind of thing. And they're written in this over-the-top fawning, obsequious Ottoman Turkish. You had to get a professional scribe to write it who was versed in this kind of document. So comparing that to the one really familial letter that appears among these documents, which maybe the audience is definitely Christian. The writer might also be Christian. They might even be Coptic monks. But that's very loving and affectionate and a very different genre from these fawning petition letters. So if you're into the scholarship of letter writing or literacy studies, this might be a source. Linguistic matters. And this is the kind of thing that Esther Miriam Wagner at Cambridge University has worked on. The nature of Egyptian Arabic during the Ottoman period. It does change over these centuries, and some of these documents give you a real sense of colloquialisms, both in spelling, in ligatures that were used, in certain expressions, etc. The handwriting, as you mentioned, it runs the gamut. There's one document that's almost certainly really from North Africa that shows the distinctive Maghrebi script. There is one document that tends to leave out the N, the nun in min, like from, just kind of writes an M with a little curve at the end. What explains these different hands? That's hard to tell. Even though these documents are in Arabic script, where Judeo-Arabic and even Hebrew does occur, there's some indication of variations in rendering Hebrew. For example, in the burial prayer on the recto rather, of this document, a short vowel tends to be replaced with a long vowel written in, like above the U in particular. And that apparently was quite common. It's as if the short vowels that usually are not indicated in Semitic alphabets were morphing into long vowels that were written out. So, as I said, I don't think these documents will ever replace. They're not intended as a replacement for Ottoman archival documents or Sharia court records or narrative sources, but as a supplement and one that's a little bit more niche, I think they do have a place.
Lovely. Well, it's a huge achievement. I mean, you have not only wrangled a large number of very difficult documents, but I think you've also increased the number of people working on the Ottoman Genizah in the world by some double-digit percentage, depending on how you count. I mean, there's Avram David and Dotan Arad, who work on Hebrew script documents mainly. Jeffrey Kahn and Esther Miriam Wagner, who work on the linguistics and philology of Ottoman Arabic and Judeo-Arabic. Matthew Dudley, who works on the 19th century, and now there's you. So that's a huge increase, and we're all really, really grateful to you for your labor.
Oh, thank you very much. I don't really see myself as a Genizah specialist, I have to say, and certainly not anything comparable to you or to Dotan Arad, Jeffrey Kahn, Esther Miriam Wagner at all. But there was a little niche for me that I think I was able to fill. Let me put it that way.
And arguably only you could have done this. So thank you. Thank you for having done it. So again, the book is open access, downloadable starting tomorrow. So I hope everyone enjoys.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much, Jane.
Thank you, Marina. This has been a pleasure.
For me too.